There is a fundamental misunderstanding regarding what the current Russian threat is to Europe, and it is leading to some rather strange choices about military spending. Actually, to make things even more bizarre, the additional core military spending would do absolutely nothing to directly defend a particular country against an attack. Nevertheless, it will determine whether a country, or which country, has a giant target on its back. Let me explain. The apparent threat to Europe is the natural extension of what we have seen in Ukraine, a traditional land-based Russian invasion headed further west. That is what NATO was formed to stop more than 76 years ago, back when the actor in question went under the pseudonym the Soviet Union. And despite a massive evolution in geopolitics over the last 4 decades, it is why European countries close, or just somewhat close to Russia's border, continue to be interested in joining the alliance. You still see it today, with NATO's recent summit geared toward getting member states to spend 5% of their GDP on defense, because you might need a lot of metal to stop Russia, or better yet, convince Moscow that it is not a good idea to invade in the first place. But at the risk of putting timelines on maps, the existential threat to Europe is not today. It is in the future. The timelines quoted on how long it will take Russia to reconstitute its forces following the invasion of Ukraine will vary, though you will often hear 5 years. And bear in mind, that is 5 years from whenever the war stops, which we are all still waiting on. I personally think that 5 years is rather optimistic from Russia's perspective, but the exact timeline is irrelevant for my broader point today. And if Russia tried invading a NATO country, Ukraine would be all too happy to take advantage of the situation and reclaim some of its lost territories, at a moment when Moscow may be distracted, thereby further pressing Russia to have yet larger military production to handle all of this at once. Oh, and in the meantime, Russia's overheated economy will fall apart, with no clear timeline to recovery, and it could get even worse if Russia remains a pariah on the global economy. So, Finland, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland. My message to you is to rest easy at night. Well, for a few years anyway. No, the real risk to Europe is not as dramatic as a traditional invasion. The problem is much grayer, as in gray zone conflict, or sabotage, or cyber attack, or influence operation. Your choice. Remember, the reason that the Kremlin does not pose a traditional threat to Europe is because Russia faces major supply constraints on its metal. But gray zone conflict by its very nature has a small footprint. The limiting factor is not something as simple as money. It is opportunity. And it is also concerns about getting caught, and worries about the retaliation that you might face conditional on discovery. As a result, even as Russian peacekeepers could not do a thing when Azerbaijan decided to reopen the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, even as Russia barely lifted a finger to help Bashar al-Assad as Syria fell apart, and even as the Kremlin responded to not one but 2 countries bombing Iran by merely sending Tehran its best wishes, Russia has remained active in various operations in Europe, trying to mold an election in Romania, plots to kill the head of Rheinmetall, cutting internet cables in the Baltic Sea, disinformation campaigns in Moldova on the eve of an EU referendum, GPS jamming in Finland, you name it. None of these have been particularly earth-shattering, and certainly nothing that would rise to the level of a NATO member seeking to trigger Article 5. But that is no guarantee that in the future, the Kremlin will not see fit to go a bit further. And that takes us to perhaps the real question for the day. What the heck is Spain up to here? You know the story about the NATO foreign ministers all agreeing to spend 5% of GDP on defense at a mid-May summit in Turkey, and then a defense ministers summit at the Brussels headquarters to second it, with the details to be finalized during the main summit a month later at The Hague. Then, days before everyone traveled to the Netherlands, Spain suddenly declared that it will not go past 2.1% spending. It seemed like the ultimate freerider move. If everyone else is going to spend so much on defense, why should Spain even bother? And it even translated into comments about the humorous coincidence that Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was just slightly further spaced out from everyone at the summit's family photo. Oh, and pick your favorite set of trousers now, because we will crown a 2025 Lines on Pants champion at the end of this video. As for Spain's assumed logic here, all you have to do is look at a map. Spain is all the way over there. It is not the Baltics. It is not even Norway. What is Russia going to do? Go on some sort of absurd expedition and invade from here? Heck, Spain barely has to worry about the firefighters problem, where it is easier to extinguish flames at the source rather than let them spread. Let Berlin deal with that concern, not Madrid. Well, maybe that bet will pay off in the long run. When Russia can muster a viable conventional threat to Europe, Spain remains secure because everyone else is paying, while Madrid spends its own cash on domestic priorities. But goodness, is it a gamble in the short run. By being the lone holdout, Spain has painted a gigantic target on its back. I ask you, if you are the Kremlin right now, and you are too preoccupied in Ukraine to properly sable-rattle Europe, but you still want to stir up some trouble, whom are you going to hit? Well, the Baltics and everywhere else in Eastern Europe are always a good starting point due to historical Soviet spycraft legacies and a higher concentration of Russian speakers. But do you know who else looks like an attractive victim? That's right, Spain. By way of comparison, would it be Article 5 worthy if there was a sabotage operation that causes a week-long shutdown of the German electrical grid? I don't know. Maybe. The North Atlantic Treaty is really short on details. It is basically the textbook example of an incomplete contract. You write a basic set of ideas and let everyone sort it out somewhere else later. That somewhere else would be the North Atlantic Council chamber, where a whole bunch of consensus building would be the order of the day following such an attack. And yeah, there would be a good chance that the Allies would collectively agree that it qualifies. But now suppose that the same attack occurs, but we move it to Spain instead. Then what? Well, the Allies would still end up convening a long meeting of the North Atlantic Council, and there is still a good chance that they would trigger Article 5. But I do not think that it is as good of a chance. And that makes it an even bigger problem for Spain than you might conclude by just looking at the electrical grid. Remember, Russia's goal with its gray zone campaigns is to sow as much chaos and discord as possible within its targets. And the target here is not just Spain, it is NATO. And it is hard to imagine a better way to cause some chaos than to pick on the current point of political frustration. Let me go into some finer detail here on the flirtation with World War III, because the exact order of events is important. Imagine indeed that Spain gets attacked and takes it up with the North Atlantic Council. Just because it is an attack does not guarantee that anything follows. The Allies first have to meet to form a consensus that Article 5 is in play. Even afterward, the individual allies decide how to help. This is not some sort of automatic process that immediately generates a set number of supplies or assistance. Well, imagine that a coalition, including the United States, but also a number of European countries who are equally frustrated with Spain's free-riding, decline to sign off on Article 5. For some, it is due to outright frustration with Madrid constantly sitting below the spending targets. For others, it is a matter of setting a bad precedent, not wanting to encourage other states to slack off in the future. And let me tell you, there are plenty of European states that are very annoyed with Spain right now. It's not just coming from the western side of the Atlantic. Or maybe the Allies agree that the attack meets the Article 5 standard. But remember, the North Atlantic Treaty does not give much in the way of specifics about what happens next. It just tells the Allies to do what they think is necessary to restore security. So perhaps some thoughts and prayers are extended, and there is some face-saving for the alliance by going through the motions. But that would still not be a good look for NATO. Moreover, the fact that Article 5 is triggered here would inject it into the news cycle, and so everyone would hear about it. Or maybe the Allies let Spain know that the council meeting will not go well, and so they persuade Spain to save a little bit of face by not bringing it up in the first place. Either way, it is a win for the Kremlin. It was a successful attack against Western Europe. NATO did not strike back, limiting the costs that you suffer as a consequence, and you have sowed a hefty bit of discord into the alliance in the process. Alternatively, suppose that the Allies form a consensus to invoke Article 5 and provide meaningful assistance afterward. Well, now it lays bare the hollowness of the abandonment threat. Free ride all you want, because the Allies will still bail you out at the end of the day. But then the dominoes fall. There go the fringe states that were just willing to go along with the plan, like, say, maybe Belgium. Better hope it does not spread like an infection down the line to a country like Canada. Russia gets hit with a response, yes, perhaps re-establishing short-run deterrence. But long-run, NATO spending goes down, and Russia's coercive capacity therefore goes up. Sure, in the current moment, perhaps Russia will still look at the entire situation and conclude that the only winning move is not to play. But that is a major gamble that Spain is taking right now. A couple of important notes before wrapping up for today. One, I said at the beginning that increasing core defense spending does nothing to directly protect a country from the current Russian threat, namely gray zone attacks. Well, remember that the 5% of GDP is 3.5% on core defense, like men and metal, while 1.5% of GDP is on miscellaneous defense spending. That includes investment in things like cybersecurity, which would help protect Spain here. That ties into the second point. It is unclear exactly what Spain's 2.1% spending declaration means. Spain says it can produce everything that it is supposed to for that quantity. Well, the 3.5% core spending requirement was centrally planned as what each country would need to spend to meet NATO's soldier and materiel requirements. Thus, I take it to mean that 2.1 percentage points are going to core spending, and maybe Spain plans to do nothing with the 1.5 percentage points of miscellaneous spending. Either way, Secretary General Mark Rutte thinks that the odds that Spain can do that are approximately zero, which makes sense. If you have a secret hack that can stretch 2.1% into 3.5% of goods, please do share so that the rest of the world can become incredibly wealthy overnight. The point is, though, that Spain may never actually fall out of compliance. If it produces what it should, then it will have to raise its spending as it goes, and inevitably end up at somewhere near 3.5%. That raises the question of why Spain would make a big public fuss over the whole thing in the first place, thereby putting a Russian target on its back for no apparent reason. But welcome to the opaque world of international politics. Just as Alexander Hamilton once said, I want to be in the room where it happens. And boy, was I ever this year. That's right, I was there in person, recording this video when the lines on pants made their way on stage to take the NATO family photo. And just as the Alliance has its traditions, so do we on this channel. Namely, giving out an annual award to the leader who has the crispest of lines on pants of all. The competition this year was fierce, but the nominees are newcomer Rosen Zelyazkov, Prime Minister of Bulgaria; defending champion Edi Rama, Prime Minister of Albania; in his swan song, Dick Schoof, outgoing Prime Minister of the Netherlands; and finally, longtime perennial contender Recep Tayyip Erdogan, President of Turkey. More than 12,000 votes were cast in under 24 hours. And the winner is Edi Rama! Yes, and you can see here, it was not even close. Rama becomes the first ever two-time honoree of this illustrious award. We will see you in 2026 when we travel to Turkey and find out if Erdogan's home summit advantage can break Rama's winning streak. Oh, and I guess like, share, and subscribe too. See ya.